Guiding us today is the talented metal artist, Charles Lewton-Brain. Hailing from Calgary, he's the most recent winner of the Governor-General's Visual Arts Award for Craft, honored for his innovative work in jewelry and metal sculpture. The inventor of many metalsmithing techniques, the most famous being foldforming, his impact as an artist and a teacher has changed the landscape of Canadian craft. Thanks, Charles, for joining us today. And as a special note, before Charles steps up to lead the symposium, I'd like to remind us all that Charles is a past president of the CCF and thank him so much for the input that he had in developing the organization as it stands. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Deb, and thanks to the CCF FCMA. It's a privilege to be here, and so Megan is going to take care of background texture for me, and any images that flow past, just consider it texture. Okay, so welcome to the symposium and panel. Moments like this are history, and the CCF FCMA has been a real catalyst for building craft into Canadian culture, spotlighting issues, reminding the cultural sector of craft practice and practitioners. In projects such as Craft Year 2007, with almost 600 events nationally, and the Korean exhibitions have left solid footprints in our culture. As shown by the membership of the panel, the Sadie Bronfman Award for Fine Craft has played a role as well, to recognize practitioners and contributions, and to use that for equal billing with other forms of cultural and arts practice. It is, for instance, the only time that craft is exhibited in the National Gallery, and its merging with the Governor-General's Award has turned out to be a positive thing, as it brings the gravitas of its 25-year history to the GGs. We are in interesting times, as evidenced by the name change of the theoretical home of Canada's craft collection, the Canadian Museum of Civilization, to the Canadian Museum of History, a move that takes it from a living, breathing idea to something dusty and stuck on a shelf. This is a time for craft to stand up and speak, to reposition and claim validity, and ground in our culture. So, what is craft? Bruce Metcalf claims that if you work in a craft context, then you are creating objects with the audience, the user in mind. A cup to warm your hands around as you drink coffee in the morning, a gold ring of meaning and memory, a wooden object to function for the home. This, he says, is love. His claim, therefore, is that to work in a craft context is about love for the user in a different way than a designer does and than an artist does. Craft practice for him is a kind of loving. Craft is now a hot term in the culture. Business is claiming it as a selling point. To wit, artisan chips, handmade sandwiches, craft beers, custom jeans. Dr. Sandra Alfoti notes that while we think of craft writing as about studio craft in the 80s and 90s, co-opted by feminist thought later in the decade, and now in popular culture, think Martha Stewart, Red Green, Death by Craft, books like How to Sharpen Pencils, Manly Crafts, that most writing about craft occurs outside the recognized craft field. In First Nation studies, in anthropology, in architecture, in popular writing. That craft is ubiquitous in the culture. There are interesting positions emerging that craft is a philosophy, that it's about ways of seeing and ordering the world, and it's a much bigger mode of working than the obvious and pigeonholed categories would imply. The DIY movement, makers' fairs in the United States with 30 to 40,000 participants, and in particular the rise of the cult of the amateur, all have to do with making and with permitting, fostering making in the hands of the individual. There are several streams of this. In popular culture, it's an empowerment against the passivity of media use and consumption, a manifestation of individuation. The internet has dissolved boundaries of geography and access to knowledge in interesting ways, giving the amateur access to formerly specialist information. The development of computer programs that allow individuals to create books Objects and designs, from large-scale photos to physical things, have allowed amateurs to practice to make objects. And as was the case with the early page layout programs, resulted in less skillful results, less skillful layout. In the high art world, such less skillful work is highly valued, where the lack of skill actually validates and elevates the object, and includes the late 90s development of post-disciplinary sloppy craft. Interestingly, sloppy craft has been seized upon by the high art world, with Saatchi Gallery, among others, promoting artists working in this way. There are art movements, such as recrafting, where painters copy weavings and embroidery in painting, presumably claiming forms of legitimacy in doing so. An interesting number of works in the fine art world are being done in craft media. Many new works are collaged, pastiche, and made from borrowed elements, the mashing echoing DJ's mixes, the recombination as the art form. This is occurring in the craft world too. The Neocraft Conference brought many of these issues into discussion for the Canadian scene. Studio Magazine has supported this ongoing discourse. ACAD's upcoming MFA, that's the Alberta College of Art and Design's upcoming MFA in craft, is specifically designed around this discourse. So what is it about craft media, or thinking, or materiality that's so attractive to the fine art world and the design world, or even the general public? And what does this mean to craft and to those who identify as working in a craft context? According to the status of the artist legislation, the international set of protocols of rights for artists and cultural workers, one self-identifies as an artist or craftsperson. For a traditional craft maker, it's easy and clear why one would call oneself a craftsperson. But the question is a large one, especially for emerging makers in this world of blurring boundaries, where fine arts people work in so-called craft media and craft media people work with meaning and content. Where do you want to play? In what context do you wish to self-identify? How do you want to market your work? I believe that in craft we have a huge spectrum of practice that may span conceptual fine art work, traditional work, contemporary craft work, and design, depending on the problem and the day in some cases. And that a single person can operate in all these ways. Craft practice, then, can be everything and still be craft. Getting the rest of the world to understand this and believe it, particularly in North America, can be tricky. Interestingly, the design world has recently been claiming that design is everything. Perhaps as in the world of physics and material science, where what was thought to be different things, like radio waves and light, and are now thought of as a single energy form with variations, or in material behaviors where glass and metal and wood used to be thought of as different, but are now understood to be very close indeed, we will eventually come to a similar understanding about making, with equal respect for all forms of practice. I'm not holding my breath. A couple of stories about choosing to be a craftsperson. I was at a party years ago, and I overheard two gallery owners talking to each other. One said, "The difference between an art object and a craft object is $3,000. They were serious, that the same object, depending on context, was worth more. The American Museum of Craft and Design in New York City changed their name to the American Museum of Design after a survey of 20-somethings showed that the word craft evoked most frequently was brown and itchy. Recently, I was in an excellent fine arts gallery in Calgary for an opening of a Montreal-based artist who works with fiber as her medium. That is, all the artworks are done using fiber processes, techniques, and materials. You or I might call her a craftsperson, and she agreed that she worked in a craft context. However, her content was all about meaning and art historical references, as much studio craft is today. Her Giglet inkjet prints of the work started at $5,000, and most of her works were in the $30,000 and up range. It's hard to see the average craft gallery showing the same work in that price range. There is clearly a cachet to living in the fine arts world. For many years in the design world, particularly in Europe and Asia, what most North Americans would call craft objects are seen as designed objects. And so you will find a ceramic pot or a jewelry piece in a design magazine or competition sitting right next to a computer, a chair, a motorbike, or a kitchen implement. The need for multiples or even function has been abandoned in the international design world. And so one-of-a-kind objects in craft media are fully valid as designed objects. Craft makers have mainly missed this opportunity to push into and be accepted in that world. Designers don't mind the word craft. Garth Clark, an opinionated gallery owner and driver of promoting high-end ceramics and glass in the art scene over the years, feels that the way into the high-end art gallery scene for studio craftspeople, especially the young emerging maker, is to call themselves designers. His gallery, now only online, recently sold a Peter Volka ceramic piece in the secondary market, a resale for a client, for $103,000. He states that in the world of the elite fine art gallery, it's perfectly acceptable to be a self-identified fine artist, but equally as acceptable to be a declared designer. That design provides a way for a craft maker to be accepted into that world. He also said it was far too late for anyone middle-aged like me to make that identity switch, that only the young should bother creating their new track record as international designers. It's an interesting premise, especially if your work is conceptual enough to work in the world of fine arts. The digital object and make on demand. One of the things I believe in that may be disturbing to some is that digital objects can be craft objects. Already in the jewelry world, 30% of what you see in stores started out as digital objects, although there's certainly a lot of handwork in the casting, finishing, setting, etc. There are some craft objects that are today finished objects as made by the prototyper in plastics. There are, for instance, galleries in the States that only carry jewelry made this way. Examples can be seen in Canada at Galerie Noël Guillaumarch in Montreal, and very soon direct-to-metal printing will become common. I've seen 18-karat gold, titanium, stainless steel, printed directly from digital files into the finished metal object, even meshes and cloths because you don't need sprues and support rods to print metal directly. Jacquard looms are computer-run and programmed, and there are ceramics works that exist virtually and are printed by rapid prototypers and then fired. All of these emailable, reproducible, digital objects are, to my mind, craft objects. And here, too, there's an interesting design issue, as the designers of the world are using these technologies to make multiple objects in plastics, wax, steel, bronze, ceramics, fiber, surface design, etc. They are thus encroaching on traditional craft materials and making, and the convergence of technology is producing interesting questions for craft makers and practitioners. There are designers, for instance, making printed, fired ceramic objects where an algorithm varies each object so that each is one of a kind and not repeated. Are they craft makers? Was Fabergé a craft maker when he drew a design and 120 workers carried it out? Is Jeff Koons when he has Meissen porcelain experts make ceramics for him? How about when someone 3D scans a piece of yours, mashes it up with other people's work, creates a 3D object, which is unique, even if parts were stolen, and then makes it in metal or ceramic or wood, just like that DJ creating new work from stolen parts? How will you deal with this? Once objects are digitized, there exists the possibility to outsource their making. And there are many online companies that you can submit object designs to, especially in jewelry and fiber work, as well as ceramics. And they then host the objects for sale. And when someone buys a piece, it's made and shipped to them, and you get a check in the mail or deposit it to your bank account for your portion of the sale. New strategies for dissemination are of interest too, especially social media. And if you look at how young craftspeople are using it, we have echoes of ways for craft to reclaim visibility and validity in the culture. I was just in New York and came across a pop-up gallery store on Fifth Avenue. Pop-ups are temporary galleries that can exist for a day, a month, or more. They're mobile and linked by internet subscribers and followers. They can occur in very public places with good walk-past traffic. Their hub is the website, blog, and social media presence. The physical space is amorphous and cool. They can happen in someone's home, as occurs in Calgary. They're cheap and very effective. The news media loves them, and social media really make them work. It's possible to work with a group to create a series of them. And in cities, there are organizers now who produce and put on pop-up events. I heard of a Tokyo art gallery. They were in a dirty concrete industrial park far from the gallery areas. They had an exhibition opening where every room of the small space had webcams streaming the opening live for a number of hours, while 2 recent graduates from art school created a painting. Afterwards, the gallery owners were asked, "How many people attended the opening?" And they answered, 48,000 people. They sold well, and the 2 students were picked up by major galleries. Creating experiences, events, and linking them with web dissemination is a great way for connecting with potential audience. The questions raised by the word craft, the conversation in our culture, studio craft art practice, the ordinary lives of makers supporting families, the truth and depth of stories and time embedded in traditional and heritage craft, all of this is on our plate. Exciting times, and filled with opportunity for us to steer things to better our world for our communities and our colleagues. So, here we are this afternoon, together with a panel of illustrious, bright, accomplished makers and thinkers. I can't wait to hear what they have to say about their careers, experiences, provocative thoughts, and ideas for our future as we build towards Craft Year 2015. And consider how craft practice can inform and lead our culture here in Canada and internationally. Thank you. I'm ending early, but time is always nice to have extra, so thank you.